Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the fourth presentation in a series of 6 in what we're calling Biodiversity in Our Neighborhood, the Oakwell series. My name is Kel Weger. I'm a co-director of the Center for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Stewardship in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Villanova University. Our group, CBEST as we're known, is very interested in all things biodiversity and all things ecosystem stewardship. Our faculty work in various places around the world, but we're also interested in what happens locally in our neighborhood. And as you know, Oakwell is right across the street from Villanova University. And so we're very interested in the future of Oakwell, and we hope this series of presentations hopes to educate the general public on things that you might not have known about the importance of biodiversity and ecosystem stewardship at Oakwell. And so tonight, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jen Santoro, a faculty member in the Department of Geography and the Environment at Villanova. So Jen came to us having gotten a Master's of Forestry in Forest Resources Management and a Master's of Environmental Management, Ecosystem Science and Conservation, all from the Duke University School of the Environment. She then went on to get her PhD in Applied Forest Ecology and Spatial Modeling at the University of Vermont's Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources. She's been at Villanova since 2009. And I'll just have to say that one of the things about getting old as a faculty member is every year I get to see new, talented, enthusiastic, bright faculty come to Villanova to join us. And Dr. Santoro is no question all of those things and more. And so Dr. Santoro's research focuses on using geospatial analysis and statistics to understand patterns and trends in forested ecosystems. Her favorite tree species is the American chestnut, and it wouldn't surprise me if the American chestnut were mentioned once or twice in this presentation. I don't know if it will or not. And when Jen is doing research and teaching at Villanova, you can find her hiking in Pennsylvania's beautiful state parks, and as she says, and admiring the trees. So without any further ado, let me turn this over to Dr. Santoro.
Thank you so much, Cal. Can everyone hear me okay? All good? All right, let's get this screen shared here. Okay, how's this looking for everyone? Solid, I got the thumbs up from Cal. Great. So I'll keep going. So thank you for that great introduction and welcome everybody. I do truly love trees. Those of you who have met me, I think, know that quite well by now. So I'll spend probably 40-ish minutes tonight talking about the benefits of trees in our neighborhoods and our cities. So without further ado, I'll dive right in. And I think we can all appreciate, okay, come on, PowerPoint, the kind of notoriety of trees in our towns. We can all think of lots of streets, maybe towns and cities, shopping plazas, apartment complexes that are named after trees. Many of you might have been to Aspen, Colorado, or perhaps Pennsylvania's own Oaks or Willow Grove that are just up the highway from us. I happen to grow up on a spruce street, so there's a tree right there. Many other roads, especially in Center City, Philadelphia, are named after trees. We've got Chestnut Street, Spruce Street, Pine Street, right next door in Philly, and tons of housing developments and shopping plazas that I've passed in my lifetime. Even our state, Pennsylvania, that's Latin for Penn's Woods. The Sylvania part of that literally means woods in Latin. So we've paid homage to a lot of different trees in our history throughout our lives, and we still name places after trees today. And I think this is really important because it celebrates the impact of local trees on creating a real sense of place in our community and communities around the world. And I think that's a call to all of us to really protect neighborhood trees and value neighborhood trees for what they can do for us. So here's a graphic from the Nature Conservancy that shows a host of benefits that trees provide. This graphic is far from complete. There are tons of benefits that urban trees or neighborhood trees provide to us. But I think this is a nice way to illustrate a few of the many and varied benefits we get from trees. Things ranging from reducing stress to protecting biodiversity and filtering air pollution. We heard a lot about air pollution last week from Dr. Shakya's talk. So it would be impossible in the next 40 minutes for me to cover every single benefit of urban trees, but I'm going to dive into a couple of these tonight. And I'll start by breaking this into 4 main categories, so 4 flavors of benefits, and we'll take them one at a time through the next couple slides. First, I am an environmental scientist, a forest ecologist, so I have to start with the environmental benefits of urban trees. They help out our air quality, they improve habitat. I'll talk about how they help water quality as well. Next, we'll move on to the benefits towards human, mental, and physical health. And there are quite a few here. This isn't research I personally do, but I love to read about it because I find this stuff really fascinating. We'll then move to economic benefits of urban trees. Trees can add monetary value to properties and to cities. And we'll wrap up with how urban trees can help to create a sense of community identity. And I want to take the time right now to iterate, especially since we all have Oakwell on our minds with those beautiful 300-year-old white oak trees, that larger, older, more mature trees tend to provide greater benefits than their smaller and younger counterparts. That's not to discount young trees or recently planted trees. We certainly still, I think, have a responsibility to continue to plant trees throughout our cities and towns. But I think it is a nice nod to these old trees. It really highlights the importance of protecting these large mature trees whenever possible, because they will quite literally take hundreds of years to replace. So I'll dive in with environmental benefits of neighborhood trees and then progress through the other 3 categories. So again, I could easily take up the entire evening talking about environmental benefits of city trees or urban trees, but I'll highlight just a couple right here. And I've tried to cite some relevant papers that I've read to pull these facts from. All of these are really well-researched topics, and I do like to turn to the scientific literature when talking about the benefits of trees like this. So first up, urban trees really help to improve water quality. They do this in a couple of ways. They help to filter surface runoff as it enters the ground. Let's say we just had a thunderstorm, a lot of water coming down via precipitation, and we've got some water rushing over parking lots, maybe over your lawn. Trees really help to prevent lots of pollutants, maybe oils or trash that was in that parking lot or in your lawn, and prevent that from entering our streams and lakes and reservoirs. So these are really important in helping to filter pollutants. If we see severe weather events, maybe we get a hurricane coming through the Philadelphia region or a really severe storm that dumps a lot of rain in a little bit of time. We're familiar with some of these from just this summer, really. Trees will help to stop that overland flow of excess water and mitigate flooding. And we know well what some of the impacts of flooding are here in the Philadelphia region. A study by Adam Berland, who's cited on this slide, and his colleagues actually specifically researched trees in addition to other plant matter like grasses and shrubs for the use of stormwater management. And they really encouraged the use of trees in some green stormwater infrastructure projects because trees, like other plants, help with that water infiltration in the soil, but they also have other benefits as well. They have large canopies. The older mature trees have larger canopies. So they're able to intercept precipitation as it's raining, so less rain makes it to the ground in the first place. Because of those larger canopies, they're also able to transpire more water back into the atmosphere than smaller plants. And when we have so much excess water, like with hurricanes or heavy rain events, these trees are really doing the work to help prevent flooding and prevent pollution from getting into our water bodies. Secondly, and I'll touch on this point briefly because next week's talk with Dr. Langley will go into this in more detail, trees sequester a lot of carbon. And the larger the tree is, the more it can sequester over its lifetime. So I will leave a lot of the details for next week, and Dr. Langley will speak about this in more depth. But I do want to highlight some work done by the US Department of Agriculture and a couple of the authors listed here. that found, studying carbon sequestration over a large scale, that annually, so each year, 1 acre of forested land, think about that as maybe 2 or 3 property lots, residential property lots put together. 1 acre of forested land absorbs about 6 tons of carbon or carbon dioxide per year, and it puts out about 4 tons of oxygen. This 4 tons of oxygen is enough to meet the oxygen needs of 18 people. So for every acre of forest, every year, 18 people get their oxygen needs met. That's pretty big. So I'll let Dr. Langley talk more about carbon next week as a little teaser. Third, trees can remove a lot of harmful particulate matter from the air, which we heard about quite a lot last week from Dr. Shakya's talk. So I won't rehash everything he said about his amazing research and the research of others in the air quality world on how trees can help with this, but it really is fascinating stuff. I'll point to one study by David Nowak and his colleagues. Again, they did a large study across the entire US because they wanted to see how much pollution exactly urban and neighborhood trees could take up. And they looked at things Dr. Shakya mentioned: ozone, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, etc. How much do trees remove from the air? They were able to quantify this, and they did this. They did the first study in 2006 and followed up to recalculate the numbers in 2018. They found that urban trees removed an estimated 822,000 metric tons of pollution per year. If we want to put a dollar figure on that, so I'm kind of jumping my economic point a bit, that's an estimated value to us of about $5.4 billion. So not only is this an environmental win, cleaner air, a human health win for the air we're breathing, it's also really an economic win as well. So that's pretty big. I'll jump into the cooler air in a second on the next slide. I've got a figure to show you. But let me jump to the biodiversity and wildlife habitat point up there. I want to wrap up this slide by saying that urban trees, especially the large mature ones, create habitat for a whole host of different species. Everything from bats, which we heard Kel talk about a couple weeks ago, herps, larger mammals, smaller insects, lots of organisms depend on trees for habitat. So we can really increase the biodiversity of a region by making sure that we have a healthy forested canopy. I'll give a nod to one of my favorite scientific authors, David Lindenmayer. He writes some of my favorite papers across the forestry realm. I think he does a really good job being both poetic and scientific at the same time, which I appreciate as a scientist. And he wrote this article called "The Ecology, Distribution, Conservation, and Management of Large Old Trees." And that just sounds like something really nice to read. So that work in particular really drives home the point that these large old trees across the landscape, but especially in canopy sparser areas like cities and towns, are just simply ecologically irreplaceable in terms of providing habitat for different types of wildlife, in terms of regulating hydrologic regimes, in terms of regulating nutrient cycling, and so many more benefits. So I think he does a really good job writing about that. So let's go back to that cooler air point. I want to bring up a figure from the World Resources Institute. So they put this great little graphic together that goes over something called the urban heat island effect. And some of you may have heard of this before. It's talked about a lot in Philadelphia. Philadelphia experiences higher heat in the city than we do out here in the suburbs. And there's been a lot of research that's been sunk into the urban heat island effect. And what this is that cities tend to be hotter than their surroundings because they contain so many paved surfaces, cement, asphalt, buildings, things that are dark in color and absorb a lot of heat and just hold it really close to the surface, where many of us exist between 1 and 6 feet from the ground for most of our lives walking around. So this urban heat island effect, if it's 80 degrees here in Lower Merion Township or in Radnor, it may be 85, 90 degrees in Center City, Philly, based on the composition of the materials that make up Philly, pavements, buildings. And I'm sure many of us this summer, I certainly did, appreciated the shade during all those 90+ degree days, those hot, humid days. I've got a great big oak tree in my yard. I spent a lot of time under that oak tree. So in these urban environments like Philadelphia, those warmer temperatures are brought about by all this dark colored pavement, all this man-made material. And if we start planting trees and maybe including some bodies of water in our cities, they help to cool the air through evapotranspiration and by providing shade. So planting trees in cities has been scientifically studied extensively and has been shown to cool the air to an average of about 4 degrees Fahrenheit cooler. When it's 90 degrees, that's a pretty big difference. In some places, this can get up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit cooler through the use of Canopy and water bodies. This is really big. We've seen that heat deaths are on the rise, and being able to cool down our pavement-heavy cities is really big in cities like Philadelphia and even those further south, which experience even more heat. This little graph in the bottom right from a 2019 paper looked at cities across the world and showed the effects of trees on temperature. Now, in some cities, there are increases of temperature with trees, but you'll see that that graph tends largely into the blues, that trees, on average, cool cities down by up to 9 degrees Celsius based on their study of cities around the world. That has a lot to do with where the city is, but I think this is some pretty compelling data about one of the benefits of urban trees. So let's move on to human health benefits. This is something, again, that is not really what I personally research, but I do find reading about what other people have done on this topic really fascinating. I'm not a psychologist, but this is really a nice partnership between psychologists and environmental scientists to do work like this. So we already mentioned and heard about quite a lot last week, the health benefits of lower air pollution, reduced air pollution. But let's dive into a couple other topics as well. So first, there have been several studies out there that have correlated the time that someone spends in nature. This could be joining me on an adventure to one of Pennsylvania's great state parks and fully immersing yourself, or it could be walking through a park or even a tree-lined street. You don't have to drive out to the middle of the state to be immersed in nature. You could walk down your tree-lined boulevard and you're immersed in nature. They've correlated this time spent in nature with several really great symptoms: decreased blood pressure and reduced symptoms of anxiety. This finding is really bolstered by a study that some of you may have heard of. It's often cited. It was done in 1984 by Roger Ulrich, actually here in the Philadelphia suburbs. He was the scientist who looked at recovery time of hospital patients. And he examined patients who were in their hospital rooms with a window that looked out and viewed nature: trees, grass, parks, flowers, all that great stuff. He found that compared to hospital patients who looked out their window and saw a brick wall, that those who saw nature had shorter hospital stays and they needed fewer pain meds during their hospital stay. So the restorative effects of nature, while not a direct causation, seem to really help us through physical and mental ailments. And on that kind of physical and mental side as well, there have been studies done that show the presence of trees and greenery really encourages people to lead more active lifestyles, which leads to better heart health and ultimately longer lives. So I'll cite two studies here. The first is by Janice Bell and her colleagues in 2008. They looked at children across the US, and they found that kids who lived in greener neighborhoods had lower BMI scores, body mass index. They hypothesized that this was due to increased physical activity in those kids because they were encouraged to play outside in nature. Another study, so this is the Ellaway et al. Study, was done on European adults. So Anne Ellaway and her colleagues directly asked people what kind of fitness they got themselves into and looked at where they lived. So this is kind of a more direct approach to correlating the presence of greenery with physical and mental health. They found that people who lived in greener neighborhoods reported 3 times higher physical activity on their own, self-reported, and found that when they took body measurements of these people, the obesity rates were 40% lower in those residents who lived in greener neighborhoods. So to me, that's a pretty strong tie that the presence of greenery and nature helps us to encourage these really emotionally and physically healthy lifestyles. And finally, our bottom right bullet point there with little sun icon, cooling shade is fantastic, helps us to cool down from a hot day. These large mature trees with their beautiful spreading canopies do a really good job blocking harmful UV rays. And as skin cancer, melanoma is on the rise, trees provide this great benefit, which is really important in cities, given that urban heat island effect that I mentioned on the prior slide. So let's look at one more graph. And to me, this is a very simple graph, but once you look at it for long enough, it's actually pretty compelling. So this graph is from Robert McDonald. He's a scientist with the Nature Conservancy. And he and his colleagues wanted to do a comprehensive study about the role of nature in urban systems. So he looked at cities across the world. I want to say there were 245 cities that they analyzed worldwide. And they found that if a city or a neighborhood had 20% or greater forest cover, those people who lived there showed 50% fewer depression symptoms and 43% lower stress with just 20% or more tree cover. Let's bump that to 30% or more tree cover. We also get the benefit of 56% reduction in anxiety symptoms. So that's pretty remarkable, I think. Increase your tree cover, and we are seeing some very compelling mental health effects. But look closer at the gray bars. They're really tall on the left side of the graph, where cities represent less than 10% canopy cover or 10 to 15% canopy cover, even 15 to 20. Then look at the bars on the right that are to the right side of the green dashed lines, the ones that show reduction in depression symptoms and anxiety symptoms. Those are short bars. If you add them up, they're only about 10 to 15% of the world's population that lives in cities with greater than 20% urban tree cover. To me, this screams, let's plant more trees. Let's increase that urban tree cover and hope that lots of other people can reap the benefits of having easy access to nature where they live. But this also means that preserving the large mature trees that we already have, in addition to planting these new trees, can really help our residents to improve mental health outcomes and could be at a lower cost to other options. It's certainly not a one-size-fits-all solution, but I think it's part of a greater solution in physical and mental health. So moving on to economic benefits of trees. There are a couple that homeowners in the audience may have heard before. That neighborhood trees provide great economic benefits like increasing property values and reducing energy usage so you can save on your electric bill. There's a piece of software that helps cities and towns to quantify in dollars the amount of benefits that their urban canopy might bring them. The most popular software is called iTree. And I think some of the Oakwell folks have used iTree in the past. A few of you might be in the audience. I'm not an iTree user myself, but I've heard great things about it. And these, putting a dollar sign on these figures can really help communities to literally value and emotionally value their urban canopy and see exactly what types of benefits their trees provide. So I'll throw it back to David Nowak again, does a lot of urban forestry research. And he and his colleague Eric Greenfield in 2018 wrote a really popular paper that estimated across the US, all urban forests in cities over a certain size, what's the value that they provide to the US? That number they landed on in 2018 was $18.3 billion. And this is from a variety of ecosystem services. This is pollution removal, cleaning the air, reducing building energy costs, stormwater management, carbon sequestration, and a whole host of other ecosystem services. So the pollution removal one alone is valued at about $5.4 billion of that 18.3 billion. That reduced energy costs share is also valued at around $5.4 billion US wide. So trees that are located close to buildings provide shade to those buildings and are able to reduce the need for air conditioning during really hot summers and occasionally help to retain heat during cold winters. Studies of the amount of energy consumption reduction vary, and this is based on location. You might be spending more on heating costs if you live in Vermont compared to Miami, Florida, but I'm sure Vermonters are spending a lot less in air conditioning costs than those who live in Miami, Florida. So the location of the city really caused these numbers to vary. So energy consumption was reduced, they found on average about 25%. So homeowners are saving about 25% of their bills, but varied between about 20 to 50% in some cases each year. So that's pretty great. I want to give a quick shout out to Kevin Conway, who's in the audience. Kevin just graduated from Villanova in 2023 in May. He was my senior thesis student, and he did a lot of really great work on Villanova's campus, thinking about the benefits of our campus canopy and what we get as Villanova faculty, staff, students, how we can value our trees more and increase our canopy. So, hey, Kevin, thanks for coming tonight. Another benefit of trees is that they act as windbreaks or buffers from damages caused by severe weather. They can also shelter homes from cold winter winds, so you can kind of hold that heat in. But this comes with a flip side too. Many of us have probably seen trees go from this position, standing vertical, to standing horizontal, and that's never a fun game. So a potential negative impact of planting trees close enough to buildings to reap energy benefits is the risk of trees falling and damaging structures. This could be due to those high winds. This could be due to things like old age or rot. But there are lots of things that could cause a tree to fall, and we do have to think about that too. But careful planning and careful planting of those trees can help us to maximize energy efficiency while minimizing the risk of trees falling and damaging buildings. And this is where a nice collaboration between urban foresters, environmental scientists, landscape architects, economists, lots of different groups can come together to help to figure out how we can get the most benefit and reduce the most risk for a solution like this. I want to kind of go back to our first point, increased home and property values. That's been found in a couple different studies, and I'll pull out one by Loria Nesbitt and colleagues that looks at quantifying social and economic values of urban forests in terms of property values. And one of the main takeaways from this piece of research that over the past 20 years, so 1997 to 2017, based on the data of the study, the presence of trees in both residential and commercial properties increased about the average value of that property about 7% and as high as 15%. So more trees, higher property values. That paper cites another study that they really leaned on as a focus of their work that found for each large, mature, old, healthy front yard tree on a residential property, the sale price of that property increased by about 1%. And that's for each tree. If you've got 4 of those trees, the sale price increased by about 4%. So trees really do add value to a property. I think, maybe a little bit of opinion here, but I think trees make a property more beautiful as well. And I'll wrap up this slide by saying that other studies have looked at both commercial and residential rental properties, so renting an apartment, renting office space, and how quickly those places rented and how long those renters stayed. And they found that if an office complex, a commercial property, or a residential building had trees around it, had a lot of greenery, that those properties had 7% higher renting rates or occupancy rates, and that the renters tended to stay, whether they were businesses or individuals, for longer periods of time. So if you're a landlord or a real estate agent looking to rent, having trees on your property can increase the value, help you fill those spots quicker, and your renters are likely to stay longer. So we'll look at one more figure that touches on some economic benefits of urban forests. This is a case study that was done in Phoenix, Arizona in 2019, so not too long ago. The study was done by Gungwoo Kim and Paul Cosio. And I pulled this one out because I think it represents a really nice single city quantification of the monetary value of trees. They really focused in this study on reducing air pollutants, but they looked at a couple other things as well. So if anyone's been to Phoenix, you might know that it doesn't have a high tree canopy. It's about 7.2% tree cover. To me, that's pretty low. But with that 7.2% tree cover over the area of Phoenix city limits, which is about a little over 500,000 trees, Phoenix experiences in 2019 $1.6 million in air pollution reduction benefits from that 7% urban canopy. They get additional savings, so add on top of this about $285,000 for carbon sequestration and another $106,000 for reduced energy costs. And Phoenix is a pretty hot place, so it's really nice to save energy in a city like that. If Phoenix were to increase its urban canopy, which is one of the recommendations of these authors, they could reap even more economic rewards. And the graph here with the purple bars, they broke down different types of air pollutants and how the urban canopy in Phoenix helped to remove different pollutants. So the trees were really helping to reduce ozone, O3, and PM10, which are two air pollutants that Dr. Shakya talked about last week in his talk. So Phoenix's urban canopy is doing a really good job at improving air quality, and this paper really points to those findings. So we'll go on to our last category, which is the community benefits of an urban canopy, and also some social benefits as well. And this has been pretty extensively studied by lots of doctors. The National Institutes of Health have a lot of papers out around this category. And one of my favorite little facts that I've learned actually relatively recently is that a bunch of scientists got together and decided to study the effects of the color green on human physiology. Now, green's my favorite color, so as soon as I saw this as the premise of a paper, I was in. Drew me in with like the first line of the abstract. They found that green surroundings, looking at the color green, lowers heart rate and has a calming effect on the human mind. So I think it's a pretty good choice for a favorite color. I've got some scientific evidence now for having green as my favorite color. The U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Forest Service has also done a lot of research on the community benefits of trees, and they found that tree-lined streets increase the perceived level of beauty in a community. So when residents are asked how beautiful is your community, those who live on tree-lined streets rate their community as more beautiful than those who do not. And that can really go a long way in increasing pride in a community and supporting community ties. Another really interesting tidbit, I'm going to jump to the bottom right bullet with the apple icon, is planting fruit and nut-bearing trees in cities and towns as a potential solution, or at least a form of urban gardening to tackle the problem of food deserts. And these are commonly called urban food forests, and they're street trees, public trees that, let's say apple trees, pear trees might be really good options in Philadelphia. We're not really going to grow oranges, but maybe Miami would want to think about that one. And these urban food forests present a novel way to really help increase food security in communities, because these trees grow fruit if they're well maintained, and that would be provided for free. It's healthy, nutritious food, and the residents would be allowed to eat the food from the food forest. So I think this is just fascinating. I don't know that I've seen one myself in practice, but this is a major topic of research from somebody pretty geographically close to us. So Dr. Patrick Hurley is a professor just up the road from us at Ursinus College, and he researches urban food forests. He's a great guy. And if you're interested in hearing more about this from the expert himself, from Dr. Hurley, he's actually giving a talk on September 5th, that's a Tuesday, at 6:30 p.m. at Root Down Brewing in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. This is part of the Phoenixville Science on Tap series that my Villanova colleague Chris Jeffords and I run. And Dr. Hurley, just good timing with this talk, happens to be our next speaker. So if you're free, Tuesday, September 5th at 6:30 p.m., can get yourself to Phoenixville. He's a really dynamic speaker, and I'm really excited to hear more about Food Forests. It's a free event. It's open to everybody at the brewery. You don't need to order a beer to go. And if anyone wants additional details, I can pass them along later. But this idea of food forests, fruit and nut-bearing trees for public access, is something that's gaining traction to help with the idea of mitigating food insecurities in communities. Really neat cutting-edge research there. And the last point I'll bring up, oops, I went ahead too far. The last point I'll bring up on this slide is that trees can help to promote pedestrian safety and walkability in towns and cities. And, you know, I, for one, can see the connection to my life. I would much rather walk down a tree-lined street than something like, I don't know, parts of Route 30, Lancaster Ave, that are just cars zipping by you really fast. I don't feel quite as safe in some of those environments. The trees do help me feel safer. The vegetation seems like it would act as a buffer. And research supports this. So a study in 2018, Marshall et al., found that at least at lower speed limits, so maybe speeds we should or ought to be driving in cities and towns, correlated trees with larger canopies correlated to fewer vehicle crashes and fewer injuries. So they did give the caveat that this is influenced by vehicle speeds. If you're driving at fast speeds, there is a higher likelihood of injury if you crash into the tree based on almost entirely speed alone. And the last point I'll call out is a really fascinating and extremely detailed study that was done here in Philadelphia. And I say detailed just from the mapping perspective and the maps and positions they were able to create in this study. Michelle Kondo and her colleagues here in Philadelphia looked at the relationship between urban vegetation and gun violence. And they found that urban vegetation may play what they call a protective role against violence in Philly. So they found the presence of tree cover, so more trees, was associated with reduced gun assaults, and this was especially true for young individuals in low-income urban areas. And I think this finding is really, really huge. It is certainly not the one-size-fits-all, be-all, end-all solution to gun violence in cities, but an important piece of the puzzle where we can take almost immediate action and consider this as one way to help reduce violence in cities. So in addition to all these great benefits I've already talked about that urban trees provide to us, we may be able to add reductions in violence to that list. I think that's pretty impressive. So here's a figure from her paper. And they've got a bunch of these with looking at different areas of gun violence. And you can see on the right-hand map, there are these little black dots. And those are the specific incidences, specific individual incidences of gun violence that they examined. And they looked at the paths people took as the crime was being committed. The green areas on this map of Philly show the tree canopy. And they were able to spatially and statistically, so two things that are very much up my alley, which is another reason I find this so fascinating, correlate gun violence with lower tree canopies. And I think findings like these are fascinating, and Philly has taken this to heart. Philly just earlier this year published their 10-year Philadelphia tree plan, and they incorporated this finding into their plan. So I have a little snippet from the plan. Other social benefits: a 12% decrease in robbery, theft, and burglary alone could yield an estimated nearly $50 million per year in social benefits. One of the ways to achieve that 12% decrease in crime is an effort to plant more trees. So I think it's very noble and great that Philadelphia, in their 10-year strategic plan to grow, protect, and care for the trees we already have, in addition to planting more, is considering the impacts on its residents and on crime and how trees can help alleviate some of that. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about some of the downsides of urban trees. There are some, of course, and a lot of them have to do with safety risks. And it's important to be aware of these amidst all of the benefits of urban trees. So some risks that certainly aren't to be taken lightly is that maintaining our urban trees can be pretty costly. If anyone's had a tree removed or had an arborist come to trim dead limbs or discovered that a beloved front yard tree had rot in the stem and it had to be taken down because it posed a safety hazard. Maybe you had an ash tree that died from emerald ash borer and you had to have it removed. These compromised trees may fall on houses, on cars, on roadways, obstructions. They could cause property damage, they could cause safety issues, and it costs a whole lot of money to take care of this. So I don't want to try to brush that under the table. Trees are definitely an asset, but they're going to cost us some money too. Another issue that Dr. Shakya touched on briefly at the end of his talk last week is that any photosynthesizing plant, trees included, produce something called biogenic volatile organic compounds, or BVOCs. And this has been researched quite a bit. These BVOCs have negative impacts on air quality. They can lead to PM 2.5 fine particulate matter entering the air and different types of ozone pollution. These things are harmful to human health. But the BVOCs that trees emit are canceled out and more by the air quality benefits that trees have. But it is good to be aware that this is something that we can't get around with vegetation. So this is a negative side effect. And lastly, I'd like to touch on a social issue, is that access to urban green space, and especially urban green space with large, mature old trees, is often unequally distributed. And it's unequally distributed where wealthier communities have those resources to access the green space, to establish and maintain urban trees, and the lower income communities do not. And we've talked about a whole host of benefits of trees across various realms. Trees and green space correlate with huge benefits like health, physical and mental health, lower crime, cooler air, cleaner air, higher property values. Lower income neighborhoods don't reap those benefits to the same level, and it creates inequities. I find this to be a call to urban planners, to foresters, to arborists, to environmental scientists, to researchers, to city planners, to community organizers, to all of us to band together and figure out how we can create more equal access to trees so that all of us, regardless of race, income, anything else, can reap the benefits that trees provide to us. And this next image from an article in the New York Times, I think shows it better than I could ever say it. I have linked this article on the last slide, but you can also Google the title, since Wouldn't Have Trees Existed for Only Rich Americans, and find it. And they compared income levels and tree cover in cities across the US. And these graphics, where median income, low income is on the left, high income is on the right, paint a pretty stark picture of who has more trees. You could go into Google Maps too and see some of the differences across Philadelphia or another city that you're familiar with. And across the board, wealthier communities with higher incomes tend to have more tree cover and thus are reaping the benefits of trees more than lower income communities. So I think this is really a call to action. We need to rectify these inequities. So wrapping up here, another slide or two. I think I've got like 1-2 more slides after this and then a thank you thingy. I do want to reiterate that everything I've talked about tonight is couched heavily in scientific research. I am a scientist. I do this for a living, and I want to make sure the facts and the resources and the knowledge that I share with you is accurate, defensible, and published in the peer-reviewed literature. So there are numerous studies, and these pie charts show different studies that tackle a variety of topics on benefits of urban trees. And for some studies, ultraviolet radiation, it looks like there's 5 of them total. 3 of them find positive effects, 2 of them have mixed effects. So it's not totally solid. But for other categories, psychophysiological stress, 25 studies, and 20 of them find compelling positive impacts of trees. There's a lot of evidence there. That body of evidence for the benefits of urban trees is growing. To me, based on the results I've presented here and the body of evidence, I think it's pretty clear that urban trees provide many benefits to us in our communities, despite some of the risks they may pose as well, and that it really does behoove us to invest in our urban canopy. This could be planting new trees in places that need them, whether that's in residents' lawns if they want them, in commercial places, and street trees, maybe in parks or public properties. It also includes maintaining and keeping alive, as long as they're healthy, keeping healthy, our large, old, mature trees. Because if we lose them, they will take hundreds of years to replace, and they give us so many benefits that we need to tackle these crucial community efforts. And we especially need to take action in a time of climate warming, where we're going to need those air cleaning benefits. We're going to need the carbon sequestration. We're going to need cooling via shade and protection from UV radiation. We need trees. Let's be on their team. So just to bring this kind of back to a more local place on the next slide, what I've done here, when I toggle the video on, I'll explain what's going on before I let it play. This is a time lapse from Google Earth. So you could open up Google Earth on your own computer or do it on the web. I did this on the web, and I just looked up Philadelphia and I scooched it over to our little slice of the main line. So I don't know if my pointer works. You can see Radnor here, Wayne, here's Villanova. This kind of fuzzy piece that's brownish and gray is main campus at Villanova. And this tan line running through half the scene is Interstate 476. I've got this started on the year 1984, and it's going to time lapse all the way to 2022. And you'll be able to see the change. So first, I will toggle on some labels that help point out things that are going to appear. So Interstate 476 is going to come in first. Let's let this go. You'll see the construction of the interstate in the cloverleaf. You'll see West Campus of Villanova being built. In the northern part, you'll see a new housing development go in. You'll see Harriton High School, and eventually towards the end, Black Rock Middle School, as areas of large tree removal. Now, I'm not going to sit here and argue that we shouldn't extend 476. We should never have built West Campus, and we don't need high schools. That's crazy. There are lots of benefits to extending a highway, to expanding Villanova, to expanding public schools in Lower Merion Township. We absolutely need these things, and they're great reasons to lose forest. For sure, these were good decisions to make, but we should also be mindful of these lost pieces of forest and make up for it later. We should make plans to replace the trees lost by planting new trees, maybe conserving other tracts of land from ever being cut, or adding other extra protections to the large mature trees that we are still very grateful to have in our community. The East Coast, and Pennsylvania in particular, has a long history of forestry, of cutting trees for timber products. Pennsylvania made a lot of money over time providing timber, but it means we have very few old mature trees left. So my call to action is, let's protect the old mature trees we have, because they are becoming increasingly rarer today. We should be proud of these large trees. They're a testament to our history, and we should take pride in the fact that we've taken care of them. Let's continue to take care of them. So I'll end on that note. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. And just so this is part of the recording, I'll leave this slide up for a moment here. Some links to a couple of resources, that New York Times article, the 2019 paper that's a really open access comprehensive study, and 2 sites, an NPR 13-minute listen on the benefits of trees, and a website called Tree People that I think has a really cool interactive website on benefits for trees if you would like to learn more. So thank you.
So thank you, Jennifer Santoro, for a wonderful presentation. It's kind of amazing to me that in all of these presentations, I learn new things from people that approach things from a different perspective. So nicely done. So we have some time for questions. If you have questions, we ask you to put them in the chat. I will monitor the chat and read the questions for Jen.
I didn't even mention American chestnut.
I'm surprised.
I know, me too.
Jen, what are your thoughts on the Lorax?
The Lorax. That is probably a repeated 4 or 5 times Halloween costume of mine. I have a orange Lorax hat. It's a pretty low hanging fruit Halloween costume, and I speak for the trees. I love that book. I'm pretty sure I have a copy on my bookshelf over here.
So there's a comment more than a question. Under normal healthy conditions, a tree's feeder roots are relatively close to the soil surface and spread as far or farther from the tree trunk as the branch spread.
Yes, they do.
We define that as the tree protection zone, which should be protected from herbicides, salts, chemicals, fuel oil, soil compaction, and vehicles, etc. Most urban tree planting pits are way too small, inadequate for healthy, long-lived tree establishments, unfortunately. So
I completely agree. Absolutely. And I think that adds more evidence to why those large, beautiful oaks at Oakwell are even more important to protect. Um, they get, a lawnmower going by them once in a while, but they enjoy, a life of, a good life for an urban tree. They have lots of space for their roots to grow. Some of them have been impacted by the construction of the house, but there's lots of additional open space. And when making planting decisions, I'm not sure if we have, I don't know if Joe's in the audience, if we have any arborists or urban foresters here who can speak more in depth to this. The selection of species is really important when you're considering the space you have for planting an urban tree. So species that can tolerate a little bit of wear and tear, red maples, ginkgos are often popular, and species that are almost okay being boxed in a little bit more. There are some trees that just cannot handle the root compaction very well, and other trees that are a little bit, they can handle it better. I'm not going to say they like it, but they can handle it a little better. So thinking about what to plant is really important, considering, yeah, those small spaces we allocate for trees, I think they should be bigger.
So this is kind of a follow-up question from a different person.
Mhm.
Can you comment on intertree variability? Are there types of trees that are better at providing ecosystem services? And how does this correlate with the types normally planted by cities and towns?
Sure. Yes. So there are some species that are likely better at certain things than others. I think generally broadleaf trees, oaks, maples, deciduous trees that have big leaves, so not our pines or spruces or conifers, they're better at rainwater interception than their conifer counterparts. So if we were looking at flood mitigation efforts or stormwater efforts, we want trees that can handle a lot of water, that can really help filter with really good deep root systems, that can intercept rain as it's falling, and can filter pollutants. And largely we're going towards some broadleaf species and some very wet soil tolerant species. Things like a silver maple is very tolerant of wet soils. So I don't know a ton of details. If anyone does in the audience and wants to chime in with particular species that are better or potentially worse at some of these environmental, economic benefits, please do feel free to chime in. I think it presents a nice opportunity for community planners, landscape architects, urban designers to work closely with arborists on these selections to make sure we're making the right choice for that particular location.
So another comment and a question.
Mhm.
My township, Upper Providence Township in Delaware County, has had free tree giveaways. Are there
Ooh.
many townships that do that? And I wonder what impact that has had.
So I'm so glad that Upper Providence is doing that. That's great. Maybe they do it for Arbor Day, like around April or May. I know where I grew up, Arbor Day is the time to hand out trees, which I think is great. Getting those trees properly planted and cared for in the early years is another piece of the puzzle and making sure they survive. But I think programs like that are really nice to raise awareness of planting trees. Pretty sure my dad's in the audience here. Maybe he still is. Hi, Dad. We definitely, went to Arbor Day events growing up, and I got little seedlings, planted trees. Our yard is full of trees at home. So I've certainly attended a lot of those events in North Jersey. But I think they're great. We should do more of them. Maybe I'll get Villanova to do one.
We have a question from, I haven't identified the questioners, but this might be someone who's related to you.
Uh-huh.
Why is proper tree planting important?
Oh man. Okay, Dad. Proper tree planting is important because it gives the tree a sense, a place to establish. So very frequently, if you're walking, and I will put the call out to all of you to notice this the next time you take a walk through a parking lot, shopping mall, tree-lined street, is notice the cone of mulch that's built up around a tree. We call these tree volcanoes, and they're bad. Building up mulch and all that moisture around the bark promotes rot. So proper planting where we give those roots room to breathe. Just like us, we need room to breathe. I don't want to be suffocated up to my neck. Really helps the tree to establish great healthy roots so it can send up great healthy shoots. So proper planting is often what makes or breaks the early survival of a tree. And a well-planted tree can live hundreds and hundreds of years in the right condition.
Great way to answer your dad. There's another question. I remember reading some trees, like the Dawn redwood, produce significantly more, around 90 times more, BVOCs than other species. So should these trees contribute? So these trees could contribute heavily to tropospheric ozone.
Yes, and I'm not familiar with that particular fact. You very well may be correct, and maybe that is a consideration when we're picking our planting options. Maybe that kind of paints those Dawn redwoods in a little less of a positive light. I'm not sure if they have particular benefits that excel on the positive end. Maybe for other points, like maybe they're great at carbon sequestration. That I'm not quite sure, but I think weighing these, so if one particular species has a higher output of BVOCs, maybe it drops in favor for consideration in urban environments.
So I think we've got a couple more comments, and then we might wrap this up. There's a comment that we in Downingtown got a free mulberry tree sapling about 10 years ago. For the past years, it's been providing fruit and is now also becoming a shade tree. So
perfect.
I love the mulberry. Make great jam.
Yes. If you ever want to share some of that. That's a great example. You're starting your very own urban food forest from, it sounds like a free tree from Arbor Day. So maybe we should be pushing to, to give away more mulberries in hopes that the trees end up like yours and you're able to derive a food benefit from it as well.
So there's a comment specifically about Oakwell, and I think it's important that I read this because this is the Oakwell series, right? So here's the comment. Oakwell boasts 700 trees over 30-inch diameter at breast height, plus hundreds smaller. 114 of these trees are eligible for heritage tree status, and of those, 26 are heritage oaks. The red oaks are amazingly healthy given how quickly other red oaks are succumbing. Perhaps the fact that Oakwell is the head of 3 watersheds makes the trees healthier. There's ample water with soggy areas throughout. It strikes me that any fields at Oakwell would be soggy and unusable. You care to respond to that, Jen?
Yeah, well, I think the Heritage Tree Program, I think, is an excellent way to really recognize these large mature trees and the benefits that they've provided to us throughout their much longer lifetimes than ours. So I would certainly encourage formal recognition of these trees via the Heritage Tree Program. And, maybe also hearkening back to my previous comment that they've had really great conditions to grow up in. They're not surrounded by sidewalks currently, or fields, or any other hard surfaces that would impact their roots. So they've had a lucky life as far as trees go. They still have a lot of life to live. They're oak trees. They're very long-lived. Let's put the process in place to protect them now. They are truly a treasure of Lower Marion Township. I don't know if there are very many trees in Montgomery County, Delaware County, Philadelphia County that are that old, that are that big. And we really, I think we really, truly should appreciate those huge mature trees for what they are, because they're such a rarity these days. We've cut them all down. So I would like to see these trees in particular preserved and recognized for their longevity, because they truly are impressive specimens.
Totally agree. So we've reached the 8 o'clock hour, and I'd like to have a couple of short comments. I was remiss in the introduction not to mention that this series of presentations came about by our center, CBEST, interacting with the Grow Oakwell people in general. And so we had a conversation at the end of the spring semester, and this idea for the series was hatched by the CBEST people meeting with the Grow Oakwell people. So we're thankful to them for getting us on this path. And I also would like to mention that if you go to the growoakwell.com website, There's a lot of information about heritage trees on that website. Click on history, the history drop-down menu, and you can read a lot more about what else? Trees. So in wrapping this up, thank you all for coming, and please join us next week, Wednesday at 7 o'clock, for a presentation by Dr. Adam Langley on the carbon balance of forest growth and related topics. So thank you all for coming, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you, everyone.